Greetings, brothers. The videos that I create are normally not based on trending topics. To a greater extent, I devote the vast majority of my content around consistent lifestyle issues that a lot of black men face, and in doing so, my attempt is to make sure that my messages are crafted in a way where 10 or 20 years from now, or even beyond, the information will still be valuable and relevant. And this is largely because I incorporate on focusing on putting principles, perspectives, and philosophies behind the core of my messages when I'm addressing different matters, as all these different things are absolutely necessary for men of self-investment to have success in their lives. There is, however, a rapidly emerging issue that I am going to focus on within this video, and I think is one that has been catching some steam, and that is the rise of black males who are of the trans community, meaning these naturally born males who identify as female, and these males attempting to establish their presence among heterosexual black men by not only wanting to be accepted for their gender identification, not only by wanting to be acknowledged for their rights to practice their sexual orientation, but also to the extent that these males want to be viewed and treated as women, even to the extent of marketing themselves as viable romantic counterparts for heterosexual black men. And the latter portion is the part that I'll be mostly focusing on within this particular video. Now, this is a very touchy subject, and I did spend some time in crafting this message, and I had actually been considering putting this content out a couple of months ago. The reason that I need to speak on this issue is because, in my observation, as I'm sure has been the case in yours as well, we can all see that there is an all-out attack on attempting to completely distort what it means to be a heterosexual black man in America, and completely distort black masculinity at large. There is what I would consider to be an attempt to make masculinity and heterosexuality a matter of context. And part of the reason that I believe that this is taking place is because organized, clear-thinking, traditional heterosexual black men, men of sound mind, stern black men, fundamentalists, if you will, really, we're the black populace's only hope for the formation of a successful black community, whether that community be formed with traditional families or even if it's encompassed of other black men who work together to build with each other. So, of course, indeed, brothers, the black man in America is under siege, as he always has been in this country. However, the type of warfare that's now being used on black men, and that I also think is just as powerful, if not more powerful, than other forms of warfare that has been used, such as advocating gun violence in impoverished black neighborhoods, particularly among black men, such as other forms of warfare like the illicit use of drugs and also the solicitation of those drugs following the consequences that result, such as mass incarceration. And I think this new warfare is attempting to completely distort the image and the perspective of black men. So, again, as I was crafting this video, there were several times where I thought of a practical way to approach this topic. And I've decided to address this matter mostly by painting a picture of what I believe will be a general template that I can foresee being used to attempt to pollute black males' perspectives, in particular when it comes to accepting and embracing the trans community and what that will mean for men of sound mind. So I want to first open up this discussion by briefly touching on the concept of sexuality in and of itself. Sexuality, of course, in its most basic form, is the way in which people express themselves and experience themselves sexually. And sexual meaning, of course, activities that people engage in for both pleasure as well as to satisfy their impulses and biological imperatives to reproduce. So sexuality is not only biological, but it's also cultural. For example, social and emotional conditioning also plays a huge role into one's sexuality. And when combined, essentially they serve as the compass to help people navigate what types of behaviors are acceptable and what types of behaviors are not acceptable sexually. And also even what might even be viewed as sexual or non-sexual. For example, in some places in the world, we know that women walk around with their breasts out publicly. And that's because, in part, there's no default association with a woman's bare breast being objectified as a sexual object. Whereas, of course, here in America, men associate women's breasts, for the most part, with being not only sexually attractive and enticing, but also as a part of her body that is usually used in the engagement of sexual activity. And thus, women are not actually, with the exception, of course, nude beaches and other types of specific areas, women are not walking around with their breasts out in America. Now, what am I getting at in saying all of this? You see, what's happening right now through the media, both mass media and through social media, both of which are forms of suggestion. Suggestion, of course, being a form of psychological conditioning. What's happening is that there is an aim to influence black men to be persuaded into being romantically and sexually involved with these transgender people. Of course, again, these naturally born males who identify as female and who may or may not choose to use hormone replacement procedures and sexual reassignment surgeries. And they're trying to paint the narrative that it's okay to be able to say you're straight, but you just like trannies. This type of reasoning, I do see it manifesting itself incrementally and also very rapidly, particularly within the black community, to the extent that I have to make a very bold yet unsettling prediction, which is, I believe that in some capacity within the next 5 years approximately, there's going to be nearly 1 out of 5 black males in America who will in some capacity find themselves involved in some sort of homoerotic relationships with these transgender people, these men who have taken on the roles of women, who have tried to mimic women. And I want to explain how I think that that is going to be possible numerically. And even if that figure ends up being a stretch, I'm sure as you'll be able to see as I get into this video, how I think that is not unreasonable to see how there will be some males who are influenced by this agenda. So I'm going to talk about what this means for men of sound mind, men who are secure within themselves, who are, of course, well established within their sexuality as straight men. However, I'm also going to address how other men who are around you, men whom at a point you may have considered to be the same as you, how some of these men will actually show that they are being taken out by this agenda. And also, again, how this agenda, I believe, will actually be able to unfold, and what that really means for men like myself and like you brothers out there who are listening to the sound of my voice. So the first thing I want to do is I want to address some ways in which I think that this particular agenda will gain influence within the black populace. Now, for one, many of you who have children or nephews, nieces, etc., little cousins, you may not actually be aware that within certain scholastic systems, children are already being groomed well before the age of 10 to have an understanding of what it means to be a transgender person, to accept transgender identification. And they're also being groomed to accept transgender people as being viable romantic partners, both for other transgender people, as well as for males and females who operate within their natural biological roles. So they're already being trained and groomed to see the image of a heterosexual black man, for example, or man, at least in appearance, through their different books, etc., teaming up with a trans person, as in another male who has taken on the image and the likeness of the female. I remember a few years back, around 2010 or 2011, a friend of mine informed me that his child had came home with a book about having two dads, and it may have been called something along the lines like My Two Dads or something like that. And at this time, his child was only about 8 years old when he was given this book at school. And the point of the book was to get children to understand same-sex relationships, and of course to condition these children to accept same-sex relationships as being not only normalized, but also as natural. Now, the school system has an incredible influence over the image of children, as most of us can probably recall either, for example, hearing words from one of our teachers that were very encouraging at a time, to the extent that we actually remember our teachers' words even decades after being out of their classroom. Perhaps they encouraged us to follow certain pursuits because they saw certain strengths of ours. They acknowledged our skills. And some of us may have actually been inclined to pursue different things simply based on an educator's acknowledgement and encouragement. And at the same time, many of us also likely remember times in which we were strongly discouraged, or where we received some sort of negative feedback from a teacher that stuck out like a sore thumb, where maybe we were discouraged in some way, and to where that played negatively on our self-image. Perhaps we wanted to pursue a career in athletics, some sort of creative endeavor, and we were probably told that we weren't tall enough, that we weren't athletic enough, that we weren't built the right way, that our art wasn't good enough, that our writing wasn't good enough, etc. And for many of us, we may have actually declined taking certain career paths simply based on that feedback from these educators. For example, I know of an individual who was told by their music teacher around 5th grade that they were such an unnatural when it came to playing the trumpet that they might as well forget about any idea of ever playing in a Philharmonic, because that was this person's dream career at that time. So this person internalized that idea to the extent that even though they were maybe 10 or 11 years old at the time, because of this teacher having such a great influence in their life, they never really attempted to try their hand at another brass instrument until they were well into their 40s. So we can't downplay the impact of the educational system on children. And in this present climate where we live, where you got single mother households, particularly within the black community, of course, where many of these mothers are working 2 and 3 jobs just to get by. And even in the instance where there are 2-parent households, many of these parents do not spend enough time with their children to educate them at home, to be able to teach them what is acceptable and what is unacceptable behavior in general life. Many of these parents rely on the school system to actually raise their children. The school system and technology are basically the best babysitters in the minds of some of these parents. Whatever it takes to get these kids out of their hair and to keep them quiet so that they can essentially live their lives and try to provide sustenance for their children. So I can actually attest to that because I actually did have, for a period of time, I was actually working in a school system with preschool age children in an educational system. And I can definitely say that a lot of these kids didn't even see their parents or wouldn't see their parents for days, because the parents would be so busy working, trying to go to school. Oftentimes they had multiple children by multiple partners. Usually, of course, these were kids who were in the inner city living in single parent households. And essentially these parents, I would say, even kind of cast off their children onto school to basically let the school raise them. So one of the first ways in which I can see this agenda for the trans community to gain influence is through getting to our kids early, during these formative years in which they're being culturally conditioned, socially and emotionally conditioned. And what is going to happen, and what's already happening, is that these kids are beginning to associate same-sex relationships with love and romance, and being able to picture themselves as being the recipients and the sharers in love and romance with these types of individuals. So even though these kids may have a natural biological impulse or inclination towards members of the opposite sex as they're developing sexually, remember, sexuality is also cultural. So they can actually still be influenced to adopt the feelings that transgender eroticism is an acceptable sexual norm. Now, one other area that I can see how this is going to end up playing itself out is through the media, of course. Now, soon enough, I imagine one of the most well-liked and famous male comedians getting paid about 2 to 3 times more money than they've ever been paid to do a 2-part movie series that'll be marketed as a comedy, in which this character will be playing the role of, let's say, a alpha male straight businessman who is committed to his bachelor lifestyle. And I can see how they'll make this character to be very charismatic, a successful all around hustler type corporate guy living in a city, let's say like Atlanta, pulling in around $500,000 a year, residing in a luxurious penthouse overlooking the city lights, where usually his toughest decision is which car he's going to pull out for the weekend. Will he be getting in a Range Rover, or will he be cruising around in his Porsche 911? His toughest decision is which chick out of his rotation will he be spending time with, because life is so good. So, will he be hitting up the stripper chick that he met at one of the local clubs, who she wants to come off the pole and be his number one, but he's like, nah, her rep is too bad. So maybe it's the wholesome homemaker type girl who's kind of in a church and she wants to settle down. She would probably be a good mom to his kids, but she's a little bit too boring for him. He needs some excitement. So maybe it'll be the gregarious Becky, who happens to be slim thick, can fry chicken and do everything else, that a lot of the sisters can do. And she lusts after his every body movement. But he's a little bit hesitant about having interracial children, particularly in this climate, so he declines that as well. None of these women will actually do the job. So I can see how this character, how it can be written where, let's say on a Saturday night, he's out with his boys, he's buying bottles, he's at the club, he's getting drunk, chilling, joking, laughing, enjoying life. And he makes his way over to this statuesque, hyper-feminine figure. Approaches, tries his A game, and he and this person are dancing the night away. Everything is cool. It's a good Saturday. So they end up exchanging numbers, and then after a few weeks, a whole bunch of conversations, and after a few dates, he's just thinking like, man, I'm supposed to be able to hit that quick, because, I'm me. I should have been able to do that on the first night. But then this person reveals that the reason that they didn't want to rush into the bedroom is because they wanted to make sure that they knew this character, that they were a transgender person. So, of course, as they'll make it in the movie, I'm sure, where this comedian will probably end up being extremely upset, extremely mad, using threats. I can't believe, man, get the fuck out of here. You a goddamn, the whole nine, right? And I think what's going to end up happening is that they're going to make it to where this character is trying to fight against their naturalness and feel conflicted, because what they're going to try to do is make it look like you shouldn't fight against who you love and you can't help who you love. So even though this character may end up hesitantly telling his homeboys like, listen, man, remember that chick from the club and everything we was dancing with, or I was dancing with, man, that was a dude, and of course he'll probably have like 3 of his boys and 2 of them will end up clowning him, and then they'll say, hey man, you ain't know, so hey man, just brush it off, whatever, you ain't hit it or nothing, right? All right, cool, right? They're going to try to make that sound like it's okay because, well, nothing else happened. But then he'll probably have that other friend who operates as the voice of reason within the crew, who's highly respected, who's another peer who's like him, but probably a little bit more settled in life. Maybe he's a married guy to a woman. And, maybe this friend is like, hey, man, listen, I know that wasn't what you expected, but bro, the universe brings people to us, man, sometimes. And you just got to kind of go with what's right, go with your gut, promoting that idea, of course, of that is really about 2 souls connecting more than it's about what's natural and what's morally upright. So that is going to be the new push, that it should be about who can you make a soul connection with, this idea of being able to tie in humanity, so to speak, being what should be most important within these romantic encounters. And of course, they'll probably try to keep it light and make everything for shits and giggles. But at the same time, they're going to have some sort of serious agenda where this character is going to have to really evaluate life and look at things and be a completely different person than whom they've always been. And then I can imagine in the sequel, after they make the first one a great hit, because I think for it to work, they're going to have to make it extremely funny, right? So it's going to have some awkward points, but it's going to have to be exceptionally funny. Probably line it up with an all-star cast, the whole nine. It's going to have to be an extremely well-crafted movie written-wise. And then probably in the sequel, what they'll do is, they'll show, well, after the person finally gave way and said, you know what, that's right, man, you can't help who you love. You can't help what happens. And it's going to sound crazy, but people are going to end up liking that movie because they're already going to like that comedian's work. And in particular, it's going to be women within the black community who I think are going to be highly supportive of this movie. Just like with another person who makes movies, of course, who dresses up as a woman and has created countless movies around dressing up like an older black woman. And I think that when they do the part 2 doesn't even have to be as good as the part 1. The part 2 might even be kind of corny, but I think in the part 2, what they're going to end up doing is showing married life. Now that this person has now married this person, right? So they married this trans person, and they're probably going to end up, adopting kids and all this stuff. And then it's going to show the benefits of, an open mind and being able to help kids evaluate life from all these different perspectives and being able to identify with all these different types of people. And they're going to make having a worldly or a distorted view as a way of raising sophisticated children, not in the way of understanding people as humans and understanding that people have all types of lifestyles that they choose and that there are all types of degrees of reasons behind the behaviors that they perform. But they're going to try to make it where a person's intellect is highly tied into their acceptance. And I think what's going to end up happening is that these kids, of course, as we mentioned, because in order for this to be effective, they'll probably have to make the movie like PG-13 or something. So these kids, of course, many of whom I mentioned are in these schools already, who already don't have fathers in the household. They're going to, of course, go and see this movie with their mom. And what's going to end up happening is that they as well will begin to romanticize the idea of transgender relationships being okay through the media. It'll kind of be like how Jessica Rabbit was back in the day. If you remember that movie, of course, especially if you like an 80s baby, and that was a very popular movie when we were growing up as kids. And many of us found that cartoon character, including myself, found that cartoon character to be sexy. And I know that a lot of my friends did as well. Just being a little kid, seeing like that sultry figure, even though it was a cartoon, we of course knew that, the figure was representing a woman and was a woman, even though it was a cartoon. But the thing is, imagine how they can actually use that same premise, but instead of using a cartoon character that's a female, they're going to use a real person who is actually a male portraying a female, and how that's going to be able to affect the minds of young boys as they're growing up. And I can see this stretching out even further into other forms of media, because if you think about, speaking of some stuff that used to take place back in the day, I remember the TLC video Waterfalls. If you remember that video, I remember the guy who was like having an affair in the video, and I think he was going back and forth and sleeping with his wife or something like that. And back in the day, especially in the 90s, AIDS and HIV was such a big thing, and it still is, but I mean, it was like huge then, because a lot of people were ignorant about it, and it had a lot of people in a state of panic. So I remember when I was a kid watching that video, how there was a period of time where I was literally petrified of the idea of sex because of that video. I was thinking like, man, if I do anything, I eat some pussy or something. I probably wasn't saying it in that way back then. I was probably, if I put my mouth on a girl's vagina, or if anything happens sexually, I'll probably be like this dude in the video. And that thought of seeing yourself rot away and seeing yourself go through these transitions where you're starting to lose yourself physically, knowing people were dying back then, that was such a strong image in my mind. So it did the trick, because it made people aware of HIV and, promiscuity and unprotected sex. But I'm using that as an illustration to show how media works, particularly on young minds. So imagine if they do something now where maybe you have like a conscious rapper, one who might be one of your favorite or second favorite type of rappers, highly accepted, usually looked at as somebody who has a broad frame of view on things, and maybe they do a rap video, and in the rap video you see a transgender person, and this transgender person is being picked on and bullied and everything like that because of who they are. And maybe, it shows like how they became the way that they are. Maybe they had issues at home or whatever have you. And then there's a young guy, maybe in high school, who sees this transgender person, and they see them getting bullied, and they see them being, constantly humiliated and everything like that. And then in the video, they're going to try to make it to where this high school kid can then see some sort of beauty within this transgender person that they're going to school with, to where they actually now start a relationship with this person, because they're trying to portray it where it's like you got to look at the person on the inside and everything that they went through. And I mean, can't you see this happening, brothers? How they're already going to start working on our young people's minds much more so than they have already? Or what about when it comes to some of the favorite athletes that are out there? Maybe, you know, a very popular wide receiver or second popular type wide receiver, or even quarterback, somebody who's highly admired, or one of your favorite basketball players, top 3 player right now, top 3 name. And maybe they'll show up to the ESPY Awards with a transgender person, you know, kind of sitting with them at their table in their row. And maybe it won't be where it's just them. Maybe it's going to be where the athlete comes with their wife or their girlfriend. Then they got a couple other guys who, you know, just regular looking dudes. But then they got the transgender person in the crew. So now they're going to start trying to make it cool and acceptable to look at it like, ah, man, it's no big deal. I mean, hey, you know, people are people. It is what it is. And I hope that in stating this, that it can be understood that this is in no way, shape, or form a video about any sort of hatred towards any person because of their orientation or because of what they identify as, etc. This is about showing the dangers and what I believe will be the warfare that's being used to, again, distort and corrupt or attempt to corrupt a segment of the minds of black males at large. So while I do not in any way, shape, or form have any sort of hatred against these individuals who may identify however they identify, my stance on this particular matter is that these individuals are living unnatural lives, and it is unnatural to do what it is that they're doing. And I do strongly believe that these people simply, or not simply, but one thing that is necessary is that these people do get help. So we gave a few examples of how we can see it playing out educational wise, how we can see this playing out in the media, through movies, through music, how we can see it playing out through associations. I'll go even further into that. So my guess would be that, especially as sensitive as gender identification is these days, that in some cities, I'm presuming maybe like a San Francisco or New York, possibly Atlanta as well, where there are huge gay populations, I'm sure that already these transgender people, these males who identify as women, are probably permitted to participate in ladies' night just like women are. So while I don't have any confirmation of this quite yet, I am sure, of course, that if it hasn't been taking place already, then it shortly will be, where if males identify as women, and especially if they do so to the extent where they are visibly, of course, portraying themselves as a female, then these males will be permitted to get in the club free before 10 or 11 or 12, whatever it is, drink specials, the whole nine, just like women. And this is the part where I can see more black men who are not of strong mind being influenced, even if they aren't participating in heterosexual activity. And I'll explain how. What I can imagine is that there will be a percentage or a certain segment of these men who, because of their wanting to be around women so much in general, actual women, that they are going to accept what comes along with the woman's lifestyle, including her associations with transgender people. So imagine it is like a ladies' night, and you stepping out, you fly, you want to go out and try to see what chicks you can mac and see what type of females you can associate with for the night or for whatever it may be. And you might notice that there's a table of very beautiful women, very attractive women, actual women. You know, as some of you guys say or rate them as 8s, 9s, and 10s, which my rating system is a little bit different. But let's just say, for the sake of the video, that these are women who would be exceptionally beautiful. But they just happen to have a transgender friend at the table too. So, you know, I mean, hey, you there for the ladies. You ain't there for the dude. You there to talk to the ladies. That's going to end up being the mentality of some guys. And that's going to be the first step towards the deterioration of their soundness of mind. The first step is going to be the social acceptance. So I can easily see how it'll be a thing where maybe you talking to the women like normal. And when I say you, I hope I'm not referencing anybody who will be listening, but we have to, you know, put this message out there to whoever it may apply to. So I'll just say that how a guy can be chilling at the table with the ladies, talking, chopping it up, whatever it might be, and how the women or a woman may introduce their transgender friend in the female form, or, you know, hey, this is whatever, Lisa, whatever the name might be, right? And how guys might be trying to play it cool because they don't want to mess it up with the ladies that are gorgeous. So they might be like, look, I ain't here for none of that. I'm just trying to kick it with the chicks. You know what I'm saying? I ain't trying to mess with all this other shit. But what's going to end up happening is they're going to end up associating with these women as well as this transgender person, and to where eventually they're going to end up being socially accepting of this person's lifestyle, to the point where after a while, if they continue to associate like that, they'll probably start respecting this person in the way of treating them like a woman, such as calling them by the actual feminine name that they've selected for themselves. Now, in and of itself, you might say, well, a person can call themselves whatever they want. You know, if that's the name that they choose, it's whatever. That's what you want to be. That's who you want to be. That's cool. And what's going to end up happening, though, is that little by little, this transgender person is going to start getting treated little by little, just like an actual woman is going to be treated. So if the guy, he's chilling, he's hanging out, he got some ladies around him, he'll be opening the door up for that transgender person just like he would for a woman. He might pull out a chair for that transgender person just like he would for a woman. He might pick up a pin that's dropped or whatever have you for his transgender person just like for a woman. Or maybe finds himself buying a drink for all the ladies, right? That's how he's going to start thinking now. And there's going to be a part of him that knows that he's going against what he knows is right. But because he wants to be close to these women, he'll start doing things that he shouldn't be doing, such as having unnecessary association with these transgender people. Not in a place where it's like a job where people are there, they work. You respect your coworkers as coworkers. However, you don't have to socialize with these people. And even at jobs, they're starting to now want people to use gender neutral language, especially for some of these larger corporations. So instead of saying him or her or anything like that, or he or she, they want to start using things like them or they to kind of blur the lines of between what a man and a woman is. So even at a point, many of us will have to make very firm decisions as to what we would do about employment in some of these situations as well, so as not to compromise our dignity and masculinity. And that is a very serious thing that's going to start taking place. But nonetheless, I can see how this can start to unfold. I can see it already happening. I can see exactly how this is going to start unraveling itself among black males in America. And this is why you have brothers out there who are very much so encouraging black men to be about themselves and to not make sure and to make sure rather that they're not esteeming any part of themselves based on a female's view of them, because many of us have been raised to want to be accepted by the woman so much, and many of us can't see our lives just independently as men, standing within our own masculinity, doing what we need to do, kind of that nomad sort of a guy who does whatever he needs to do to make sure he has to survive, that he can do well in life, because all of his associations with success and happiness are always constantly tied into a woman. And when you think like that, then it makes it easier for these women to be of influence to you. So that's what's going to start happening with some of our brothers out there. They're going to start wanting to be accepted and embraced by women so much that they'll start to become passive about situations like this, where, oh yeah, we going to hang out this week. Yeah, she gonna bring her tranny friend, but I mean, that's just some other shit. Like, I ain't there for that. You know what I mean? I'm there for her. I mean, they cool anyway. They don't be trying to say nothing to me or nothing like that. So, I mean, it's whatever. Or eventually over time, you're going to start to see how some of your friends and your family members, how their mentality is going to start to get worn down, because they're going to start making statements like, hey, man, I mean, shit, it's 2019, man, it's about to be 2020. I mean, people doing whatever they do. Shit, you can't help who you love. It is what it is. Like, as long as they over there doing their thing, as long as they ain't bothering me. Or maybe even, hey, I mean, as long as they cool and they respect me, I mean, we can all be friends. Everything is cool. See, what's going to start happening is after a while, there won't really be much left of a traditional black man. There won't really be much left. That is what they're trying to do. And I can also see this too. And this is a reason why it's important for men to exercise sexual discipline, because there are a lot of guys who associate being hypersexual with being more masculine, or, you always want to hit something, or you always want to get your dick sucked, or you always want to fuck. They associate that with being a representation of masculinity when it's not. Just because you have sexual energy does not mean that it always has to be used in a way in which you are seeking some sort of sexual release. It doesn't mean that just because you always feel like you got to get some, that you actually got to go get some. You can use that energy and transmute that energy into other things for higher purposes. Sexual transmutation is an actual thing. I've actually used it myself for creative purposes. But what's going to start happening is, just like they're going to start allowing these transgender people in these clubs and being treated like regular women, you're going to start seeing, even if you start going to strip clubs, I think it's going to get to a point where they're going to start allowing transgender people to be there. And maybe they'll split the club up, right? Maybe on one side it's just the women who are normally there, and then on another part they'll have like transgender people. Or maybe they'll even mix it all up and it's like, hey, we're going to identify who's who. And maybe they'll have to identify themselves in some sort of a way as being a transgender person. But the fact that some men will be able to go in that environment still, whether or not they associate with these people or not, whether or not they're around these people, the fact that they'll be able to be in that environment and accept what's going on in that environment, in and of itself is already a sign that, again, there is the mental breakdown that's going to start taking place with these guys. And then after a while, especially for men who are usually sex crazed men, they're going to start little by little, engaging in these behaviors. And this is something that we need to talk about. because sometimes people don't want to accept the realities of things. And I know in one of the videos of one of our YouTube brothers, the Thinking Man's Templar, I remember how he mentioned in one of his videos, and I don't want to misquote him. However, he was essentially describing how men can find themselves participating in acts that they normally wouldn't participate in, but because a woman's there, they're okay with it. So kind of like running a train on a chick. Normally there's going to be like a limit or a rule, I guess you could say, as to what is permissible in the bedroom, right? So, no, man, I ain't about to be naked in front of no other dude. But now, if it's a chick there, now it makes it okay. Oh, I mean, well, he up there fucking, I'm back here fucking, so I guess that's cool. You see, already little by little, the sexual cultural influence of depravity has already been manifesting itself within black male spaces and within male spaces in general. It's just getting to a point where now it's just like, okay, now it's so all out where people are starting to pay a little bit more attention to what's actually taking place. And I think that you're going to start to see even more so within pornography, where some of your favorite adult actresses are going to start having scenes with these transgender people, or are going to start participating in sexual acts with these people as well. And because a guy might be so hooked on her that he's going to try to downplay what's actually going on and just try to make it about her and just focus on her. It's kind of like how these porn stars, these male porn stars, they find themselves in these compromised situations because they have tried to make themselves believe that when they're participating in these acts with women, that even if something is extremely unacceptable or something that will otherwise even be considered homosexual, because their mind and their focus isn't on that, their mind and focus is on a girl, that anything else that takes place is not really a big deal. It's like, oh man, I mean, I know, we was both doing this chick and, oh man, maybe we got a little bit too close or something like that. But I mean, I was focused on her. I wasn't thinking about the dude. And these guys, it's a known fact that the more that these guys do these scenes, the further that they go into the realm of pornography and shooting, the more they let their guard down. So they might have went in very straight and narrow, like, listen, man, I only mess with chicks. I'm only doing this. It has to be me and a girl or other chicks or something like that. I'm cool. I ain't going to be sitting up here running no trains or doing no gangbangs or nothing like that. And then what ends up happening is after a while, they get comfortable doing these scenes and they get comfortable more and more dealing with different types of women and having more variety of types of sex. And then it's like, oh, well, okay, I guess, it's all right as long as it's a chick there still. It ain't going to be no dudes or nothing like that, right? So then eventually they start getting further and further into more acts, to the extent where if they were to look back over their history and their catalog and they say, now, if I wasn't doing this as a job and I just saw or heard of a guy who was doing this, how would I classify that guy? But now it's gotten to a point where they're so corrupted that they now have to make themselves believe that they weren't participating in acts that were of a depraved and homosexual nature. And you see, brothers, as we go along and as we look at ways in which we can work together and build things for each other, build things with each other, the thing that's going to start happening is that you're going to realize that as time goes on, you're going to have to separate yourself from some other black men who are going to become influenced by this trans takeover, if you will. People that you may have been trying to establish and build with. And the reason is because they are no longer suited and fit to participate in establishing an appropriate culture for black men. They're no longer suited for that. This might mean some people that you've been cool with for a long time. You're going to have the strength and the fortitude to not still deal with them and still accept them for their lifestyle practices and try to make a differentiation between, oh, well, if they doing that, that's them, but they ain't got nothing to do with what we over here doing as far as trying to build. You can't, let me say it this way. When it comes to you selecting who's going to be a part of your life on a social level, people that you're going to network with, people that you're going to build with, and we're talking about other black men, we have to have strict, stern rules. And I know everybody isn't going to have the same ideology or be of the same opinion about certain things. But I'm sure one thing that we all could agree on as straight black men is that type of behavior has absolutely no place within the formation of the development of a black male community. But the issue is that some males who are already of the black male populace will be influenced by this. And it's going to take each individual person making a commitment to know that they will not be accepting of this sort of behavior. It doesn't mean that you have to hate other men, but it does mean that you have to recognize what's right and what's wrong. Even if it means that your circle is extremely small. Ideally, I can envision after a while where it's almost going to be like The Walking Dead, where you are going to have your people who are going around trying to avoid the plague or whatever it is that is going on in The Walking Dead, whatever that thing is that happened that caused the people to become zombies. And largely you're going to find yourself, especially depending on the circles, just sticking with your group. And your group is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Because as you go along, it's going to also require that your group not only not be practicing unnatural things that we've been mentioning, but also that they stick to a moral code, an ethical code that works for that group. And that men who are wise and who are reasonable, who are sane and who are logical, understand needs to be implemented in order to have dignity and in order to have integrity within the development of a culture for other black men. This is not the time to be liberal minded. This is not the time to take your foot off the pedal and just be kind of loose in your thinking. This ain't the time to try to be the cool dude that fits in. This is the time for us as black men to be firm in our beliefs, to be unwavering in our views, because we are indeed living at a time where, whether you believe in certain biblical prophecies or not, you can see essentially that this world is going to hell. And I'm not even a person who believes in an actual literal hellfire. I use that as a reference to basically you can see that this world is shit now. So as we go along, I can even see how at a point, and I've been thinking about this for myself, where I can see how many of us are probably going to be living in very rural areas, kind of off to ourselves or congregated among other like-minded brothers. Not saying that there's going to be anything wrong with living in major cities or anything like that. But I think that after a while, for when you talk about trying to preserve something or trying to build something and have the opportunity to preserve it, you're going to kind of have to take the path that isn't walked, which is that path that might be isolated, where there are not many people, where you may not be able to see a home in either direction that you look. It may get to that point, but we have to be to a point where we would gladly choose death and happily prefer death over the compromise of our masculinity, over the compromise of our principles, of our morals. We're going to have to choose death first. So my brothers, as we go along in this time period, I encourage you to keep your mind strong, and certainly may wisdom be with you.